I love how when we had on this episode, as everyone's going to discover, we did the clap, and Dr. Joe was just like, I don't know what you guys are doing. Like, I don't know if this is a cult. But yeah, we went everywhere
He's
and anywhere.
he's an independent man. He's a progenitor. He's an originator. He's an
That
innovator. He's not just going to clap without any kind of understanding of what we're doing.
Well, Eric, that actually best exemplifies the way that he thinks. Is that you just said we're gonna clap, and everyone else just monkey see, monkey do. Like, yeah, we'll clap with you guys, and he was just like, I'm gonna observe this and see what happens because he's thinking in his head best practices.
I need to understand why we're clapping
Yeah.
before I clap. And then he's like, oh, you're clapping to signal to Brandon, your wonderful audio guy, that
Yeah.
that's where the recording starts. And he's like, well, we're on the same track. I don't need to clap. He's so smart.
Yeah, he's 3 steps ahead of us, especially when we got talking, which is interesting that we found out his views in terms of the best form of governance. Where he talked about we talked about totalitarianism, just interesting things. Like, people think they're coming here for this episode to learn about the OG. You're going to throw some hip hop terms at me, Eric, but you said it's very important from the hip hop community where you pay respect to those that came before you. For those listening that are interested in bodybuilding, interested in things like a peak week or flexible dieting, this is kind of the guy that started all the gangster shit. The people in this modern social media age, I'm not saying practitioners like you, but for the greater masses, they might not know who our next guest, Dr. Joe, is, and they really should.
Yeah, they probably don't. They might if they followed me. And if they just listen to this intro, they're probably even way more off base because all we talked about is clapping, totalitarianism, and hip hop,
Yeah.
which are pretty much not at all present in the podcast except for minor asides. But yeah, so Dr. Joe is, and I mean this completely honestly and without exaggeration, he is the guy, he was probably the first person to do online bodybuilding coaching, something that is so ubiquitous now in 2019, and that has been borrowed from to create more Gen Pop coaching and powerlifting coaching, online check-ins every week, Excel-based programs, columns that show your macros and weight, sending in pictures or video every week, and sending a brief review of what happens and having your coach get back to you. That was literally all started by Dr. Joe advertising in back when it was magazines, and his career transcends, or I should say spans, the era when magazines were the way we communicated information in bodybuilding, and the forums, and then now social media, which he's less active in the most modern form of it, but that's changing, and but he's definitely the progenitor of it all. So it's really cool to have him on, and his academics speak for itself. The fact that he's competed at a high level as a WNBF pro speaks for itself. The fact that he's coached and at one time was the dominating coach for WNBF pro bodybuilders and at the highest level speaks for itself. So it's just someone to really learn from, and to, if you are a coach, to understand your own history of how this career path got wide open.
Yeah, I think what's amazing is not only as a practitioner, so once again, from a knowledge standpoint, what he brought to the table and what those, if you're interested in lifting, what you will learn from that standpoint, but also from a longevity perspective, if anyone's interested. And let's face it, I think everyone in this modern social media age, they have maybe some design of joining the community, having some sort of career. Like, maybe some people see themselves, and I'm not trying to be funny, more as a personality, others as a communicator, others as a coach, as a trainer. As long as you're not a lifestyle coach, we'll accept you. But everyone, you see yourself fitting in some sort of way in this industry. And what's interesting, one of the takeaways for me is how Dr. Joe essentially created a new niche, and then which has since exploded, as you said, the online bodybuilding coach, or the bodybuilding coach, just having a coach in general, and how it wasn't a thing done before, but now taking a look back, it seems obvious, where it's like, why wasn't this done before? So the opportunities for entrepreneurs out there to provide genuine value to is another cool takeaway.
Yeah, the creation of a new niche. I think there's something to be learned from this episode if you're interested in innovation. There's something to be learned if you're interested in bodybuilding and the peaking process and just the evolution of that. And there's something to be learned about pursuing knowledge and being passionate and being curious. And I think those are all part and parcel of his personality and story, which we get into. And it was just a real treat to have him on.
Yeah, and we will not keep you. If you enjoy the Iron Culture podcast, make sure to leave us a rating and review. It takes you 2 seconds. It has to be an honest review. I'm not saying a positive one, but just an honest one. And enjoy this episode with Dr. Joe. Dr. Joe, I loved your clap. You nailed it.
Was I supposed to clap?
So, look.
No, it doesn't matter.
Emotionally, you clapped, and that's what's important. I am thrilled with the episode we have today for everyone. The Iron Culture for lifting enthusiasts. The guest that we have today, Dr. Joe. Eric, this is a true story when he was in Toronto. Last year, brought up Dr. Joe, how he's on this gangster shit before everyone else. And I gave the biblical analogy off camera of kind of John the Baptist, where he started implementing a lot of things when it comes to a contest prep for bodybuilders, when it comes to a flexible dieting approach, long before it became mainstream, and in a way was an innovator and was someone that helped propagate all the stuff that probably doesn't get the attention or credit that he deserves. We want to talk not only about those accomplishments and the mindset, how he developed some of those things, but also shift the conversation into talking about being starting a business, a brick and mortar business, an online business, being a sustainable or having a sustainable career in the lifting community as a coach. Because I think, and again, I want to get this stat, Eric, I said it in a previous podcast, but I think most trainers, the majority of trainers will last around 3 years in the industry before they peace out. And there's numerous reasons behind that, but just seeing someone that's been in the industry now for, well over a decade, several. How long has it been, Dr. Joe?
Just over 25 years now.
25 years, right? That's something that we all hope. I try and emulate Coach Eric because he's someone I look up to. He's been in the game for over a decade. To see someone else doing it right, the right way, which is so rare, honestly, to see, is amazing. So I'm thrilled to have you. We're both thrilled to have you.
Looking forward to it, man. It's going to be great.
Awesome. Yeah, I think Omar did a really good job of setting up what we're going to talk about in this episode. There's probably a lot of folks who come from my audience who are familiar with Dr. Joe because in many ways I'm cut from the same cloth. He was an inspiration for me. I attended a seminar of his in Sacramento back in 2008, which for those who know the history is a year before we started 3DMJ, before the four of us got together and really wanted to kind of walk in those same footsteps and carry the baton, if you will. But Dr. Joe, and I mean this with no exaggeration, is the progenitor for the online modern bodybuilding coach, the good ones at least. And his career spans when it was still the magazines to when it became the forums to now, and then two different ages of social media, at least in fitness, where it was pretty much just Facebook and then the emergence of Instagram and YouTube as the primary platforms. So. And on top of that, he has a very successful brick and mortar with his franchises, and he's done a lot more than that, as we'll get into. But Dr. Joe, can you just give us a little bit of background on yourself, who you are, and the elevator pitch of why you're awesome?
Well, as you guys mentioned, it was kind of almost by happenstance out of my own career before social media, before information was easily accessible. You basically just had to go to textbooks and look for information if you weren't willing to just get it out of Flex magazine or something like that. So the short story is I was looking for ways to enhance my own knowledge for my hobby as a bodybuilder. So I was in physical therapy school, already starting to compete from the age of about 20, 21, and had never even heard of the drug-free bodybuilding movement. So I started out in NPC shows and was doing my best as a young natural guy to try and get somewhere. And at one point, I remember a state chairman came up to me and said, you've got such great symmetry, you've got great potential, but you've either got to get on some gear or go over to the natural side. And I said, what's that? I don't even know what that is. So I immediately found a show, a drug-free show, and competed over there and won the overall on the amateur side, started competing on the open level. And at that point, it really opened my eyes that I had a potential future in this on that side. So I started scrambling for information, and it just really wasn't there. So I started interviewing a lot of top bodybuilders. I mean, somebody that I might compete against, whoever won that show, I was like a journalist, asking them everything they did, everything they thought, and I started picking it apart from my growing amount of physiological education from physical therapy school. So once I graduated as a PT, started working in orthopedics, ended up winning my pro card a couple years later in the WNBF, and had just continued my education for fun in a PhD in nutrition. And it was fun because I started really starting to see some of the nuances that were separating successful bodybuilders from not, and starting to analyze some of those reasons why people always look their best the day after a show, what's happening physiologically compared to what they're actually doing. And so, Eric, like you said, I just started testing the waters with things like, why are people eliminating water? Why are people eliminating sodium? What's happening in their body to make that happen? So it wasn't long after that I started at least, experimenting on myself for sure. Some friends that I would be working with, helping them with nutrition, and getting some dramatically amazing results. So by the time I started writing for some magazines, I think one of my first articles was in Muscle Media. Then I started writing for Natural Bodybuilding and Fitness. Eric, you mentioned we had forums, and so some banter was happening there. But once I started chronicling some of the things I was finding in the magazines I was writing for, the audience grew pretty quickly. You mentioned, Eric, some of the magazines back then everybody would flock to. We knew the date those came out on the stands, and we all had the same information pile that we could slog through. So I was doing a lot of experimentation at that time on myself, on clients, and to just kind of speed up to the point where it became a thing. I think it was around 2001 or 2002 when I put my first ad in a magazine that said, contest peaking specialist. And my whole thing was I was trading ad space for articles. And I was involved with a supplement company that we shut down at that time. And on a Friday afternoon, the editor said, "Hey, Joe, I need your ad for Monday." And I just realized I had nothing to advertise. And so over the weekend, I just had to come up with something to sell. And so I thought, well, maybe somebody would hire me to help them with prep like I'm doing with other people. So I think it was right around the end of 2001 where I put that ad in Natural Bodybuilding and Fitness magazine, and everything has grown from that point.
So I should have added one other title to your accomplishments is hustler, because that's what I heard there.
Oh, yeah.
Just hustling.
Isn't that a common story, though? Just something so serendipitous like that? There wasn't some grand design. It was just out of sheer necessity.
Sure.
Absolutely. The intersection of necessity and opportunity often leads to success. But I also I think your temperament and the way you think is also a big part of how you're able to seize that opportunity. One thing that strikes me among innovators is that they are aware of what is currently happening, but they do not put it on a pedestal. So I find it really intriguing to me that you were interviewing top bodybuilders, interviewing your competition, reading everything, getting curious about education, and finding out everything that other people did. But the average bodybuilder, and I don't mean any disrespect to the average bodybuilder, because I was one of them at a time, goes, right, and therefore that's what I should do. This is what the champions are doing. This is what I should do. But your first thought, or maybe shortly thereafter, was not, okay, I have the answer, but why is that the answer? And actually being willing to question the underlying practices and traditions. And I think that's a really interesting quality. Where do you think you got that from?
First of all, I would say very much like the comment about innovation and opportunity coming from necessity, it was also just from pure failure. I mean, imagine before there were some of these better techniques and better methods, Eric and Omar, that, time after time after time, I'm the guy running to the mirror Saturday morning and always crushed that I just looked like shit. You think you've got it all figured out and this is your best prep, and no matter what you did with conventional peaking methods, it just never worked. So I had to figure out why. There was no way I was going to keep failing myself, failing to improve. just by using the same methods over and over and over.
Makes a lot of sense. So it wasn't just from the start, you're the golden child of critical thinking. It's also you were banging your head against the wall, looking not the way you wanted to. I'm really disappointed. I had you on a pedestal, and I got to take you off.
But see, that was the first mistake, Coach. You said about pedestals. What did we just say about pedestals? Can I go off on a quick tangent for this podcast? I want to ask both of you a question. However, from my personal perspective, getting into lifting and reading those articles and how it's very easy to follow dogma. Why do you think, so both of you question the current practices? Is this best? Why is this the way of thinking? Why do we think this way? But in the lifting community as a whole, I would say there's a lot of dogma. And so you'll see cycles and trends when it comes to nutrition, where there'll be a low-carb fad, a low-fat fad. Now there's a kind of keto where people, not that keto's bad, but there's people that think it's the one-size-fits-all approach, or now the carnivore diet. For bodybuilding preps, where it's like you only need to eat these 6 foods. What do you think it is? And maybe I don't know enough about other communities. I only really know the lifting community. But it seems like there's a high prevalence of dogma, so it's kind of guru worship. I did it this way, look at me. Why do you think it's so prevalent in the lifting community, and essentially bad information being spread around, or not optimal information? There's less innovators, less people like you, and more people just willing to follow what other people are doing.
I'd love to get your yeah, you go first, man. I'm curious about hear what you think.
Well, I think it really just stems from actual education, and you know, I've seen Eric's career grow, and he's the go-to resource now whenever an opinion is thrown out into the any space. There are people like Eric who says, well, no, because of this, or yes, because of this. And before we had any people in this industry that had those kind of academic avenues of support, it was just a guessing game, and so it just came down to who had the best physique. That's who you got to listen to, and you're exactly right, Eric, that there weren't really coaches back then. There may have been a couple people in the writing community for those Weeder magazines, like Chris Aceto. There was nobody doing contest prep for a living, and as I said, I just kind of stumbled into it in 2001. But before then, there just weren't authorities, and so Omar, I think that's the biggest segue of opportunity now for people who are competing or people who want to become coaches. It's funny. I almost laugh every time I see the words evidence-based, because that's so cliche now. But if you really do understand where you can get information, how to think through and evaluate studies and research, it does create a lot of opportunity for growth. But the reason I think very few people still do that, Omar, it's just easier not to. It takes work. I just did a podcast this morning on supplement usage and how do you even decide whether a supplement has any value. It just takes a lot of work to sit down and read studies and filter through opinions that might counter each other. But that would be my short answer.
Yeah, I largely agree with that. I think there's what I call the transient fitness community, and it is, and I don't mean people living on the street.
That's homeless bodybuilders just looking to get jacked is all I'm thinking. Roaming the streets.
When I mean transient, I mean in a literal sense. They're here currently, and then they're not going to be later. And I think that is the obvious market, but it's not the sustainable market. And I think the fact that there's a lot of people these days who are out of shape and unhappy with that, but not quite ready in terms of their stages of change to make a commitment to doing something that will actually fix the problem, it creates an opportunity for people to say, well, you don't have to commit. You just need to buy this program, this supplement, do this 5-minute abs workout, what have you. And then they can combine that with having something that is desired, either a physique or, unfortunately, sometimes a credential that is abused. We've all seen you go on YouTube and it's some doctor talking about tomatoes are killing you, buy my book kind of thing. Like that's the Dr. Oz, the Gwyneth Paltrow or the Mike Chang. You can use any ability of status or authority to then capitalize on the fact that people want to change but aren't ready to change.
Yeah.
And that's basically the entire basis of the supplement industry. So I think that's unlike other industries in many ways, especially product-based industries. It's probably more like some other service-based industries, where you can, to some degree, rely on the fact that it's just a thing that you buy and either works or it doesn't, and word of mouth will kind of take care of that. But when you have such a large flood of people who are going to be doing this whole quote-unquote fitness thing for a couple months and then not, and then be tried again, they might eventually become full adopters of the fitness lifestyle, if you would, if you would. But it's just much harder, like Dr. Joe said, to market. Oh, okay, you want to get in shape and look great and make this your lifestyle and change your life. That's not something I can truthfully pitch you in 5 minutes and make it sound sexy and attractive. You have to find a way to communicate truth and a lifestyle change, and that's just doesn't pick up as much. So I think we see, to some degree, just the result of the market, and I think, well, I am excited about some of the episodes we're going to have on in the future where we can talk about innovative ways to utilize more traditional marketing strategies, but to reach more people, because people like Jeff Nippard or I think you, Omar, do a great job of finding that blend. But that's a whole other podcast. But I think that's my answer.
Okay, yeah, because I was going to say that I think what's so important maybe in any industry is to have people like yourself, Eric, yourself, Dr. Joe, that then lead the way for innovation or change, to question the way things are. And I think the overall fitness IQ, at least from my personal observation, that's why I wanted to ask you guys. You guys have been around longer. Overall, as a whole, has gone up thanks to individuals like yourselves contributing to the community. So now people, they might be catch-all phrases, and you're joking, Dr. Joe, about, what does evidence-based even mean, first off, but where people talk about flexible dieting will be a term thrown around, or for natural lifters, the importance of strength, whereas before, it's like you could turn that on its head. Like if you meet someone in the lifting community a decade ago, they might think 6 foods no matter what, and so maybe that overall IQ has gone up. Maybe can we turn the conversation now, Eric, you leading the way for some of the accomplishments or some of the innovations that Dr. Joe did, and let's get into the nitty-gritty, some of that science, before we get into the business practices and being a coach and all those things.
For sure. I think it might be cool just to kind of continue the story a little bit. So you put this ad in the magazine, and that's where it starts. And now on the other side of it, you end up having a nationwide franchise. You've coached multiple world champions, and your academic career hasn't stopped and doesn't look like it's got any sign of slowing even. So if you could take us through the evolution of your business, and I would love to hear also the entire span of your academics, as much as that might feel narcissistic talking about it. I think it's just cool how it's not only deep in one area, like myself, I'm obviously a specialist, but you have some breadth to it with creative writing. I think that'd be cool to talk about. And then where you've kind of wound up today, if you could keep us walking through that Dr. Joe journey.
Cool, man. Well, once I did place that ad and had worked with a handful of clients, I was already writing in the magazines, and that particular publisher had 5 or 6 different genres that they would feed. And so I was getting some general population interest. But I also got invited, once I started appearing in those magazines early, different promoters would invite me to speak at camps. And the one that really cracked my career wide open in this area, where I may never have even been sitting here, I could have just gone on as a gym owner and physical therapist and all of that good stuff, was Nancy Andrews. So she's now one of the co-owners of the WNBF, but she was a promoter back then. She is a 4-time world champion. She would always do a big camp in the Boston area, and she started inviting me to speak, and I became just a mainstay. So for almost 20 years in a row, I started speaking at her camps, and I would get a lot of clients very quickly, just because I was using practices that were superior to conventional, traditional peaking methods. I started winning a lot, and so it would not be absolutely an understatement to say that sometimes some of these bigger shows, world championships, I would have 25, 30, 40 clients in the show. Most of the top pro shows, there was a span of time for 10 years that I might sweep almost every division, 1, 2, and 3 across the board, have all of the people, on our team that was winning. And so that became a real force to be reckoned with. People would see our Team Klemczewski gear at the shows, and they just recognized that this was something to be feared. And so a lot of people started emulating that and started coaching on their own. I mean, that Lane Norton was a client of mine. I helped him win his first pro card. And, it just proliferated from there. But along the way, as that was moving forward, I did continue my general population-based business. I did own a gym in Evansville, Indiana, and I was scaling that with multiple trainers and services. And Eric, you mentioned my writing. I ended up, just again, out of necessity, at least I think it was out of necessity, writing a book, a nutrition, general population-based book that I could give my clients just for better information, more direct. Because, as you mentioned, I was the guy who brought macronutrient-based tracking to the industry. Before I started doing that for my clients, it just didn't exist. So I needed a platform to teach people why that's important. That was the bedrock of flexible dieting. And so I wanted to teach that budgeting type technique for flexibility. So I wrote that first book. And when I was editing it for a second edition, because I always considered that was going to be a work in process, one of my clients was a local physician, and I helped him lose 60 pounds. And he ended up being kind of a writing nerd. He was the editor or president of his yearbooks and college newspapers and all that. And so he said, man, I would love to co-author that with you if you give me the chance. So I thought, okay, to have an MD on the book cover with me would be fantastic, bring us both more opportunity. So we did that, and in the process of even writing a second edition to that second edition, I thought, almost like physicians would back in those days get an MPH, a Master's in Public Health. I thought maybe something more academic, as a terminal PhD would help my writing, because I really got interested in the publishing aspect. We had a publisher, they put us on tour, they were flying us around to do different media events. And so I ended up working toward a PhD in health education. Because instead of just being nutrition, I kind of tied nutrition at the time, because there really weren't PhDs that I was aware of in biochemistry and things like that, nutritional biochemistry. I thought nutrition was a little blasé, so I wanted that health education purely, again, for publishing and business growth desires. So I did that, and then once we worked through that phase of our book publishing career, I decided, man, this was really fun to learn some of the publishing side of the industry. So in my early 40s, just purely for fun, I thought, one day I'm going to retire, and I want to do something fun. I want to transition to, maybe teaching in a university. And at that point, I was starting to fatigue of things just like anatomy, physiology, nutrition. So I thought, what would be the fun thing to do? So I ended up doing a master's in creative and professional writing, and I ended up kind of flipping my primary genre over to narrative nonfiction. I went in there for fiction. I was going to be the next Stephen King, retire, write the great American novel, and I just couldn't get away from nonfiction. That's what I've been doing for 20 years, and I loved it. When I started reading and sitting under the professorship of some of these nonfiction guys, I thought, this is amazing. These are the people who write for The Atlantic and NPR and those kind of things, and this seems more real life and fun than just fiction. So I ended up flipping over to social science writing, and my thesis ended up being a kind of a personality social psychology book. And so then when I got out, I thought, okay, this was unbelievably the most rewarding, fun thing I've done, but I just got a taste of it. I wanted more. So then I thought, I want to really dig deeper into the subject of social psychology. So I started another master's in psychology and anthropology. And that's what I'm working on now. I actually am halfway through that master's, and I'm taking my time, because one of the things I really love about this, Eric, and I think you'll appreciate this, when you're in a formal educational process, you get the mentorship of some amazing people, all of these professors who have done this for their entire careers, and they have all of these different experiences. I get that funneled into my experience. So, I could learn all this stuff on my own. I could just read books, but when you get to work with people who are at the top of their industries, it's just so much more rewarding and gives you that much more structure. So I'll stop there in terms of kind of what I've done academically and all of that. I skipped a lot of stuff in the industry we're talking about, but
we'll come back to it.
Yeah, Dr.
That's good. We'll circle back. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a little confused because you seem to be implying there's more to life than just lifting, and my brain can't comprehend what you're saying here. Like
not much, but
not much. Okay. Yep. Anyways, makes sense now. I got you.
So in review, I just want to make sure I've got the letters after your name right. There's a master's in physical therapy. Is that correct? There is a doctorate in public education or health education. There is a master's in creative writing, and then there's an in-process master's in social psychology.
Social psych.
Social psych. So that's cool.
I just think that's amazing.
And the first doctorate was in nutrition.
Oh, pardon me. So I missed a doctorate in nutrition there. Okay, cool.
That's the important one that we're talking about here today.
Right. So there's health education and nutrition as doctorates, and a master's in physical therapy. So yeah, I just think that's awesome. I think that speaks to your clear passion just for learning, and I totally agree. I think something that it's unfortunate in my mind how different a undergraduate degree and a graduate or postgraduate degree is, because they're so different that if you were not a huge fan of rote memorization and stadium classes and cramming, and having a professor who you're excited to learn from and walking in and finding out it's their grad student teaching you, A, that's understandable, but B, man, doing a PhD or a master's is sitting down with your advisor while one of your colleagues now is teaching their class to the undergrads, and they're bitching and moaning about it, and having unstructured, challenging conversations with them, working on your own contribution to the literature, and sitting in classes of 10 to 20 people talking to the professor while you discuss theory and are encouraged to openly challenge their thoughts and bring new things to the table. And that's really what I think most people wish a college education is what they see when they watch movies, when they have that cool, crazy, engaging, innovative professor who changes the lives of his students and they have this deep connection. Unfortunately, that just doesn't happen when you're enrolled with 20,000 other people in some class, but it does definitely happen at the graduate level, and I think that's why we both probably find it pretty addicting. And as soon as I recover from my PhD, I might consider doing a little more. I hope my wife's not listening right now, because Barb wouldn't be happy to hear that. But anyway, I think that's awesome. So now we've understand where your passion for learning has taken you, and probably will take you even after this master's, I have a feeling. And now we understand how you totally dominated the bodybuilding scene, and I can definitely attest to that. When I was a competitor and not even yet a coach, I just remember looking at him and go, oh, he's working with Martin Daniels. Oh, he's working with Sean Clarita. Oh, he's working with just all of the top names in the game from the 2000 era. At one point or another, they worked with you, and sometimes that was the game changer for them at being at the top level. So yeah, you were definitely became the model, and I don't think that's any kind of arrogant statement. That's just the truth of the matter. But it is interesting to me how coaches weren't a thing, and I think that's just something that kind of came out of the history of fitness, which we'll talk more about in our forthcoming second episode with Dr. Don Moraes, where we talked about kind of the 1900s through the 1960s and how there was always just kind of this. It started with magazines like Bob Hoffman and Joe Weider would just write about, hey, these guys use my methods in my magazine, but there was never the formalized coaching that kind of occurred in parallel but different in like strength and conditioning or formal sport. So we're almost in a new era now where being a bodybuilding coach is a thing, but that is literally almost 2 decades old, but no longer. which is, I think, pretty incredible to see kind of history unfolding in front of us.
I think one of the transitions I've seen have always taken place in tandem with social media changes, or at least communication, information changes. So, when I started that with, the magazine era, that was a little bit more of a focalized way for me to get in front of an audience. But then when people of your generation, took off with social media, it was able to expand much, much, much faster, to the point now that, as you said, it's not only just a thing, it's almost a necessity. I mean, everybody who competes now has a coach. It's so rare if somebody doesn't. It's just part of the package. And I was with Paul Ravella, doing some filming for some of our National Academy of Metabolic Science coaching tiers. And I asked him, how many people do you think really just make a living? And I'm talking six-figure, I can do this full time in coaching. And he said, I have no way to base this, but I would have to say at least 100,000 people. There are people who have not even competed in contests who are full-time coaches. People with zero education, but just because of social media and good marketing, they're able to create those audiences. So it's not only a thing, it's becoming cemented now with so many more people in academia getting those masters in exercise science and PhDs in nutrition, who are coming out now, and they're going to be the foundation of this industry for the future.
No, I think that's well said, and I think it's like all things, it's a double-edged sword, right? We have people who are not necessarily qualified but good at marketing themselves, who look good or what have you, who are able to position themselves to have a six-figure coaching business, or sometimes a six-figure air quote coaching business, because what they're doing really isn't coaching. But also the technological innovation of the internet has allowed us to do things that are much closer to coaching, like Skyping with clients, doing video messages, getting live feedback, things like that get you much closer in terms of the appropriate level of communication you need to coach people. And I think that's important, because while there were local coaches, say 10, 15 years ago, you were limited to the local talent of coaches if you were an athlete. So if you were coming up, let's say just in Sacramento, because that's where I was from, I could think of maybe 5 or 6 people who you could work with who are locally, physically there. And, that's almost just statistically, you're not going to have a very high chance of getting a really good coach. Maybe if you're in New York or something, which also was around the birthplace of natural bodybuilding, you'd have a lot more options. But bodybuilding is the niche sport of all niche sports. And you could even put air quotes around the word sport there. So the number of competitors, how distant they are, and how you have to travel for shows, how small the competitions are, how kind of mom and pop the whole feel of competing, especially in natural bodybuilding, is, it means that you're going to be a part of a small community if you're limited geographically. So the ability to bridge those gaps and connect you with qualified coaches or unqualified coaches of the internet, and the utility of things like Skype and YouTube and video messages, etc., I think has really opened the door. I certainly now feel comfortable in the modern era calling myself a coach for what I do, because I can connect with people right now we're doing a video discussion between 3 people in 3 different countries, which is kind of cool in my opinion. So yeah, I think the technology, I think you're 100% right. The technology has opened a lot of doors to allow that to happen.
Yeah, I was going to say, Dr. Joe, from speaking as an outsider now, someone who has not competed in bodybuilding, can you take us back a little bit? So 15 plus years ago, as some of the things that were commonplace that you questioned, and how you came to replacing them through your practice, through your education. So just take us back before flexible dieting, where you said peak week, if you could describe what that is, just some of the practices you saw, and then how you went implementing your own changes.
So the first thing was just hydration, because we all at that point knew what it was like to wake up and just be flat, and your skin was just kind of soft and thicker. You just didn't have that separation, no vascularity. I'm sure we all who do public speaking have pictures of the differences of what that looks like. I've got photos of people from one day to the next, even hours. I have pictures of people from, here's where they wake up, here's where they are 2 hours later, 4 hours later. and it looks like you put 15 pounds of muscle on somebody just with hydration. So that was the first thing I did, and then I started looking at sodium as a tool instead of something to just either eliminate or decrease or even maintain stability with. I started looking at, how can we use this as a tool to help pull in, intracellular water into the muscle tissue. So those were probably the two biggest caveats I brought to the table early. But then one of the things that Eric mentioned was eating up into a show. There was a fallacy that people would talk about, don't peak too soon. I would also often get a message or something like, oh man, I peaked 10 minutes too early or 10 minutes too late. And I would laugh, like, that's not how this works. You should be able to look your best for an entire day and sustain that with those little meal to meal nuances. So I started looking at how you can best create that level of fullness, increase somebody's metabolism back up to a point where they're not quite so carbohydrate sensitive. And so again, just almost by pure happenstance, I was working with a client, one of my early world champions, who, she actually struggled to get a pro card. It took us a few tries to get a pro card because she was a pretty small ectomorph. And that, matter of fact, she's right up there with you, near Toronto in Ottawa. I had the fortune of being able to see her live because we had started getting ready for one show. That one was canceled. Then she had some medical issues that made her kind of pull back from the summer show. So by the time we were ready for fall, we had been dieting since January, and her first pro show ended up being the World Championships. So, here we were as a small ectomorph, and I was worried that she was going to get too thin. I was able to see her about a month before the show, and she just had these nasty feather striations in her lower lats. I had never seen a female with glute striations like this. And so I had no choice but to start increasing her food, or she was going to start losing volume substantially. So in 1 month, I was able to just about double her carbs, but she gained 7 pounds, ostensibly mostly glycogen and water. But her skin fold measurements actually were halved in that time. So if she was at 3 millimeters in her abs, for example, she ended up at 1.5. And so we were able to double her food intake, put pounds of body mass back on her, which made her less sensitive to carbohydrate fluctuations digestively. And so not only did she win the lightweight class, but she won against the heavyweight. Again, I mean, the most remarkable thing to me was this person really had a tough time even getting a pro card, and then she walks away as an overall WNBF world champion. There's no way she would have ever done that if we were just kind of zipping down in a traditional dieting method. So that got my wheels spinning, and I thought, well, instead of worrying about peaking too soon, maybe that should be the goal, and we need to start pulling people up. And I titled that as I wrote a series of articles on the phases of dieting. And I titled that one, a metabolic building phase, because in my mind, we were just reversing those gears to a point where now we're back into a calorie surplus very subtly. And all of those great things were happening in terms of increased energy to train. So imagine those last 4 or 6 weeks, you're not depleted, you're actually, increasing your weight in the gym, your poundage in the squat rack, that kind of thing. So that was another big turning point for me, because anybody that I've been able to get to that stage ahead of time, it's just undeniably the best they're ever going to look. That is the premium way to hit the stage. So that was just one more turning point for me, career-wise.
Yeah, and I think almost any coach who's worth their salt nowadays, no pun intended.
Oh, you intended that one.
I know I did. We'll agree that if you can, like, getting someone ready early is not a problem. That's fantastic, And I would rather beat somebody up a little more than I'd like in the process of getting them shredded if I can do it when they're 4 weeks out. Because I know just within 4 days of being in calories coming up, they're going to look markedly different. And then you tack on another 3 weeks on top of that, and you start to get a much more... The cool thing about it that you were talking about is how much more predictable their body becomes when you're trying to get them to look right. Because there is something about a beat-up body where you will see somebody spill over on weird numbers of carbs or just you throw new foods into the equation, and even if they are flexibly dieting, when you've only got 100 grams of carbs and 30 grams of fat to play with, like how flexible can it be? So, you have a piece of bread, and oh my God, it seems like you've got some kind of insensitivity. And I think it does take just some time of being in higher numbers and getting that natural variety back in before they become much more stable, which really was the problem before, right? We had people crash dieting into shows, changing their sodium and electrolytes, changing their water, and kind of hoping on a star to look good, when they're not only bringing an unpredictable body to the stage, but they're also changing a lot of variables at once. And I think you just get a much more resilient physique where, shit, I look good 3 weeks out, I look good 2 weeks out, I look good 1 week out. I'm not going to change much, but I'll change a little bit and I'll look even better on stage. So I think while there are like differences between like myself or a Lane Norton or a Cliff Wilson or even you, some of the ways we do things, I don't think that's one we would disagree on. So I think that's
the funny thing is, 15 years ago, that was something that you just wouldn't do. It was feared that if you are ready too soon, you're just going to lose mass. And so there was a timing issue. Everybody played the game of trying to time that perfectly. So, you said any coach worth his or her salt now would automatically default to that. That's not true, going back 10 or 15 years ago. And if you carry that forward, Omar, to some other things, like, I even think of things like this. You mentioned even the phrase peak week. That's just something I made up because I needed writing content. I'm writing for 4 or 5 or 6 magazines at a time, and so I'm trying to, be as instructional as I can. And so a lot of those things that I was writing about just became dogmatic terminology and boundaries in the coaching world. But if you take that metabolic building into peak week, that's where what I now call the progressive linear load came in, because my default for peaking became what I would call a modified front loading. So everybody did the traditional deplete and then load at the end of the week. And again, I saw that depletion phase almost very harmful, and it would really flatten people out. Then you had to guess how much you're going to carb up on. Then if you overcarb, you were just totally screwed because you may not rectify that by contest day. If you did taper back enough, then sometimes you had to almost kind of reload a little bit. So there's all of these timing issues. So I decided, why in the world, when we're so cognizant of pre and post-workout nutrition at any other time of the year, we know with that, quote, anabolic window, we want to get something in our body right afterwards. We want to get those carbs, get that insulin response. Why would we negate that during the most important week of the contest year, peak week? So I started spreading training back out and almost front loading because I wanted to find that ceiling of glycogen threshold. So I knew where it was, whether that's 300 grams of carbs for one person or 1,000 grams for another or 100 for another. I would start the weekend prior to the show. That would be somewhat of a rest weekend. I would increase their carbs, wait until they're starting to gain a pound or two, look and see if they're spilling over at all, and then kind of taper back to the show. But then, as I said, you would have to almost do another little mini load at the end. So it ended up being an undulating type of load. And a lot of people now have taken that and they call it a front load. They may be even more aggressive with it on the front side, somebody like you mentioned, Cliff Wilson. But at the same time, now homeostatically, you have a lot of variables going in 2 directions at the front of the week or the end of the week. So for me, it became easier just to moderate a little bit on the front side of the week. And so an example might be if somebody's been dieting on 150 grams of carbs, maybe the weekend before the show, I have them up to 200 and just see how they are. Then maybe as we start training a little heavier Monday, I go up to 225 or 200. But by the end of the week, I might be up to 300 or 400 very subtly, because now instead of finding that ceiling at the beginning of the week and then having to hold it or taper or mini load again, I'm just simply keeping all the variables moving in the same direction. And talk about easy. I mean, this takes, some of the magic and the sexiness out of peaking, because you're literally doing something that's almost foolproof. It's just a matter of watching for those critical cues so that you know when to withhold a little bit or step on the gas a little bit more. So you're still coaching and timing and predicting, but you really have so much of an easier fail-safe if all of those variables are moving in the same direction. You just don't have to fight a client's body.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's it makes a lot of sense, and it's basically eating up into a show, which is something that people will talk about. It's the same thing, just different language, and that is really when you start to look your best. And I think almost like the show season schedule kind of prompts some people to get into a position where they can do this. Like if you have a great season, and let's say you compete and get your pro card in April or May, and then you're like, oh, well, I'll do my first pro show to see how it is, and you do that in July, and then because it's your first season as a pro, you're allowed to do worlds, and if you can stick out the diet, you're going to compete in November. Well, shit, like you're not going to be dieting anymore. At a certain point, you better be eating up, or at least trying to hold on, or maybe even coming out and going back in, and you get to play with those themes and see what it's like to be at a much more stable body weight, and see how you can actually gain body weight and look better. And I think those are things that's how I saw it as a coach. I would have that's exactly. I can remember specific clients where they got the pro card and then they said, you know what, let's take it all the way to Worlds. And then all of a sudden I have a new challenge presented to me as a coach, and I'm like, well, I know how to diet you for 24 weeks straight, but I don't know what to do if we got another show 12 weeks after that. And I go, I guess we just increase your food. And it's like, oh my God, look at that, you look great. So I think that it makes a lot of sense. It's logical, and there's so many case studies to where it's worked quite well. I will also think something that's very cool about what you've done is you've always been someone who recognizes the limits of your own scope and the limits of your own expertise. You talked about Team K earlier on, and just people knowing that it wasn't just you. One of the first people who really impressed the hell out of me was Corey, when I saw her speak in 2008, and she was the first one who really publicly acknowledged that I was aware of just how common disordered eating and body image relationships are in the sport, and not from just the perspective. If you look at academia, if you were to search bodybuilding, you'd find, well, I'll go back to 2008. You'd find like 5 publications that were physiological in nature, and then you'd find like 50 that were psychological in nature, talking about anorexia, steroid use, and gender roles, and basically a very negatively framed, man, these bodybuilders are crazy, huh? Let's look at them anthropologically and poke them with a stick because they're so weird. That was basically kind of the summary of the science. And obviously now, with more folks like yourself and me and all the people who've gone off to do graduate education who are interested in bodybuilding, we've kind of built that other side of it to get a little more well-rounded. But I would love just for you to speak to a little bit about what it's been like to be a team leader and to build a team of experts around you. I can think back to the folks who you brought on to bring more periodization into the training side of bodybuilding, and then also caring for the mental health side of bodybuilders as well. I think that's super valuable, and it was a great example for us at 3D Muscle Journey.
Yeah, I have to say this has been quite an evolution. I'm not the same person I am today as I was when I was 27 years old with my first business, but I have definitely learned that to have the strongest people around you and give them the independence and platform and really help them shine is absolutely the way to elevate all ships. And so, my personal business philosophy with hiring staff, I've always only had one request at my interview process. And I'll tell them, if you want longevity with me, I will do everything in the world to help you and your career individually and us collectively as a company. You just have to make yourself irreplaceable. I don't have an exact thing I need you to do. I'm bringing you on board because I think this is going to be a cool partnership and a way to collaborate. But I fully expect and hope that you're going to create things beyond what we're both even thinking of right now. And of all the people I've done that with, Corey is the one who remains, and she is as fiercely independent and intelligent as anybody you could hope for, because she really does care about her clients, but she's also a very incredibly team-oriented person who takes that independence that I've offered her, and she responds in a way that, you know, she wants to build things and create things and be the best in the same ways that I do as a company, but in her lane as a health psychologist. So, you know, for somebody, you know, she's had a lot of recreations of herself professionally, like I have. You know, she came on board hiring me. First of all, she hired me to help her win a figure contest, and so I pulled her out of the NPC, and you know, she instantly won a WNBF figure pro card. Then she won a Fit Body pro card. Then she won a bodybuilding pro card. Then she won a couple titles in figure, and you know, she never placed out of the top 3 at Worlds. Just one of these amazing competitors who would do anything to win, but she cares as much about her career in health psychology as that. So she's even been able to transition out of her competitive career, and she loves to do more functional training now. She's an aggressive cyclist, but the thing that remains is she's constantly building new curriculum and ways to help people. You know, as you said, Eric, not just with disordered eating, but just not knowing how to fit real life and this kind of sport together. How do you do that? It's more than just flexible dieting. It's sometimes having an entire overhaul of your outlook and your relationship with food and training and the sport, and trying to be the best mom or dad or just human being you can be. So, you know, I'm glad you brought Corey up, because she really is the epitome of somebody who is out there trying to help people live their best lives in being physically healthy, having goals in this sport, and yet making sure that that's not the only thing you're living for.
Yeah, that's really well said, and I almost feel like we missed your voice for a solid maybe, or your collective voice, I should say, because I think Corey was very much at the center of that. And somewhere around that 2008 to 2012 span, where it became very science heavy in the natural bodybuilding community, very like macro focused, periodization, like all of the X's and O's were moving ahead at light speed, and I think that's good, but it was sometimes at the cost, or even at the sneering eyebrow, looking down upon kind of the idea of you're a human, and that you might even be able to get better performance and stay in the sport longer if you were to pay attention to your needs and think about how the X's and O's can impact your psychology. And yeah, I think we've done the best we can to carry that baton at 3DMJ, but we had some lag time to actually build up our audience so we could be that voice. But yeah, it's really good to have you kind of back on the scene. And speaking to that quote unquote back on the scene, obviously you never left, but your focus was much more, and correct me if I'm wrong here, on the brick and mortar business and your franchises. I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit, your offline business presence, which I think is something that doesn't get enough attention in the online discussions.
Yeah, there was a point in time I definitely tried to get away from this sport, and you guys have dragged me back in, and you just won't let me leave. But part of that was very intentional on my part to build our franchising company. So, you know, I did buy a gym in Evansville, Indiana when I was 27 years old, and I fumbled around trying to see what that would be like in a physical space, and had a lot of fun hiring personal trainers and creating systems. And then, oh gosh, almost 15 years ago, I was speaking at an event, and you know, somebody came up to me and said, "You've got to help me do what you're doing." And I already had the intention of creating a license or franchise model, but this guy really pushed me to get it done. And so we spent an entire year creating the first curriculum for that. And my ultimate goal was, I knew at some point I was not going to love bodybuilding as a sport like I did then. So what's the natural progression for me? And one of the things that I constantly do is evaluate, where do I want to be in 5 years? Where do I want to be in 10 years? Because if I really have that as a goal, I better be doing something now to make sure that's going to happen. And so I'm constantly forecasting and thinking about those next steps. And so for me, that was that franchising model. And so we put a lot of time into that. We started aggressively helping our program owners build. We've brought on board probably in the last 15 years about 200 total, and we've continued to evolve what we can offer, what we can do, creating even sub-licenses. So now our Diet Doc program owners have even the options to become performance coaches, and even with Corey, mental health, or I should say mindset and motivation coaches. We have created with Tyler Mayer, and now we brought in people like Paul Ravella to contribute in the National Academy of Metabolic Science, so people can even become certified and prepared well to be coaches. And that's really what I spent a lot of time doing in the last 10 years. And what has dragged me back truly is people like yourself, people like Paul, who want to have that more balanced voice in the industry. And it's just fun. I'm no longer working with 300, 400, 500 clients at a time. So I can easily sit back and work with maybe 25 or 30 at a time and really, help them individually and still work on the business side for our growth. But there was definitely a lag time. It's interesting that you noticed that I kind of disappeared for a while and got pulled back in.
Well, I'm happy to be the mafia that pulls you back in just when you think you're out. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I was gonna ask a question actually for both of you guys. It just dawned on me while we're doing this podcast. It seems like, and it brings me back to episode 3, Shadow Iron Culture, with John Meadows. What he was saying, where it seems a lot of the innovations when it comes to lifting has been on the natural side. So things like you talk about peak week, or you talk now about macronutrients. You talk about flexible dieting. You talk about hydration, sodium manipulation. I guess my question for both of you, why do you think it is, or seems to be the case, that the natural lifting community is at the forefront of these innovations? Do you think it's perhaps leapfrogging off of something that John Meadows said, that, as a natural lifter, you have to do everything that you can to try and look your best, whereas when it comes to an enhanced coach or an enhanced lifter, drugs play such a huge role that they're looking at that big slice of the pie while kind of ignoring some of the more minor nuances that are necessary to optimize your physique, and then maybe how things get lost in the translation. Why do you think it is that the natural lifting community has been at the forefront for the overall lifting community in terms of what's most optimal?
Joe, you want to start?
Yeah, I would answer that and just segue from Eric's mafia terminology in that I have worked with a lot of PED using clients, and initially when I had clients in the Olympia, in the Arnold, two things would happen. They would say, you cannot use my name, you cannot associate with, you with me for 2 reasons. First of all, politically, I'm supposed to be working with this person, and if I'm not, I'm going to be looked less favorably upon. And so I had people often who were actually working with me, and they had even paid another one of the NPC IBB coaches, and so they thought they were, that coach thought they were having an influence. They were doing nothing they said. And also they looked at me as somebody who really had kind of a secret. Like, they saw what I was doing in the natural world. They would see I helped people win more than 400 pro cards, 150 pro titles, and they thought, wow, I found the secret weapon. I don't want anybody to know I'm working with Joe, because then they'll want to do that. So you really just don't get a lot of notoriety in that game. And I think on the bikini side now, there are so many female bikini competitors who have just completely changed the game. They're just not as cutthroat competitive as some of those early IFBB clients I had. But the other side of that, Omar, is I think they're just a different breed often when it comes to the work ethic, as you alluded, John Meadows might have said, in that they look at food because of the PEDs, enhance their metabolism, their ability to be anabolic. They just live in a different world that's not the kind of reality we do. So, I remember explicitly this one client of mine who would place in the top 3 at the IFBB in the Olympia. And, she would say, gosh, hey, I really feel a little flat. Do you think I could go have a dozen cheeseburgers? And I would be like, no, you can't. But that was very normal. That was just a normal thing. I had a client who went over and competed in the IFBB European Tour, and something with it was a few years ago. So the international phone issues that he was having, he could not communicate with me. So he gets back and he said, "Oh my gosh, I looked so horrible on the day of the show. I was so watery." And I said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "Well, Thursday I was looking a little flat, so I went and had 12 donuts." I'm like, why would you do that? But again, to your point, I just think it's a different world in terms of what they experience. But also, I've experienced a little bit of that political backlash where they just, there may be more people using coaches than you think, and you just don't hear about it.
Sure.
That's really interesting because I haven't worked even on the DL on that side of the fence. So it's always cool to hear those stories from someone who has. And I think it's very interesting to hear that you've worked with a lot of those folks, and people just don't know about it. And it makes sense. I think bodybuilders are extremists, for one, regardless of whether they're on the natural or the enhanced side of it. But I will say that on average, the enhanced side of it, they're going to be even more extreme in personalities to be, on average, to make that choice. And that's not a judgment or a negative thing. I think it changes the coaching dynamic, I would imagine. So I think that's really interesting. And then, to answer your question, Omar, I think you just have less variables to optimize, and it also, in the natural side of it, it is different. Like I'll talk around who this is because it was an interesting conversation, but I don't want to put anyone on blast. But I was talking to a high-level national NPC competitor who was working with a very prominent, I'll say, quote-unquote, coach in the IFBB scene. And this was back when we had just started 3DMJ, and he was asking me, "Oh, how much do you charge your clients?" Because I just want to know what compared to what my coach charges. And I said whatever it was at the time, it was like something like $100, a month. Our rock bottom prices when we started that, we couldn't have fed ourselves on. And he goes, "Yeah, my coach charges $2,000 a month." And I looked at him and I was like, "What?" I didn't get it. And he was like, "Well, he's also my supplier." And I was like, "Supplier of, so the entire relationship of being a coach, it was almost a drugs first approach. And then here's a PDF on your nutrition. Like, here's the diet, and we'll remove peanut butter when you're 8 weeks from now, and then we'll cut out your carbs 8 weeks after that, and then we'll shitload the day before the show." But the thing that the details were focused on were the drugs, and that may very well be appropriate if that's the variable that's going to make the biggest change when you're talking about, the kind of those thresholds that John and Mike were talking about in our conversation about steroids. When we're dealing with people who are NPC national level competitors trying to get their pro card, and they're on 5 grams of gear plus. And yeah, I've been lifting for 15 years. Yes, I understand the basics of nutrition. I'm just going to kind of do that and maybe be blind to the ways I could be changing things for the better. But let's focus on what's the best drugs for me to take to harden up and do all that. So I think it just becomes a priority shift. Because in many ways, it doesn't matter what you do with your periodization or your training or your nutrition. There's nothing I can physically do to get to be 200 pounds on stage, just with my body, let alone at the IFBB pros who are 6 foot being 280 pounds on stage at the highest level.
Right.
So, the way I would go from being 180 pounds on stage to 200 pounds on stage would be some amount of drugs. And then to go to 200 to 220 to 240 to 260 to 280, although that's probably not even in the cards for me genetically with drugs. The point being is those are all drug manipulations after a certain point.
Right.
Leanness, not so much. Peaking, not so much. But man, an unpeaked, a poorly peaked physique that has another 60 pounds of lean body mass than you is still going to beat you in the IFBB Pro ranks. So I think it's easy to not have the focus on the finer details or the nuances of optimized nutrition or training when the signal to noise ratio is that much higher.
Sure.
I will say, though, that because this information is bleeding over to that side of the sport, you are going to see people look, incredibly better. Like the clients that I've worked with to get IFBB Pro cards or to move up drastically in the IFBB, it was clearly because of better nutrition. I mean, paying attention to those details, peaking better. You're exactly right, Eric. I mean, if you're going to put on 60 or 80 pounds of lean body mass contest weight, that puts you in an entirely different stratosphere. But when you can take those people and then start focusing on some of the details of nutrition and hydration and peaking, it is a game changer for sure.
Oh, I totally agree. I remember there was a mid-2000s Olympia. It was one of the first or second wins Jay Cutler had. And they caught him just getting off stage, I think, on day 2. And they asked him, what did he do differently to look the way he did in prejudging versus finals, and was he happy with it? And he looked at the guy, and just, you could just tell, like, he didn't have time to prepare. He was disappointed. He got off stage. He's dieted. So there was no time for him to prepare the proper answer. He's like, I don't know, man. And that was pretty much it. Like, it just seems like a guessing game sometimes. It was just like, and this is someone who's already won the Olympia. This is the guy who was battling Ronnie for half a decade, and he's still, I don't know, man. Like, so just to show you how hard dying some of those traditions are, and then that would tell you, yes, if you could change some of those practices, and you could just have a predictable peak.
That's exactly 25 years ago, Eric, why I started down this path. I mean, for that word, predictable, there should not be a guessing game involved with this. So you should be able to isolate those variables and predict and become consistent with that. And, that has taken this entire industry to a whole new place.
Yeah, well said. And if, those guessing games should occur your first couple shows, right? Maybe third season you got the big rocks figured out, but Jay Cutler, like, it just blew my mind. And it could have been just him in an off moment or a rough night, or things didn't go according to plan, but that's not the first time I've heard that sentiment, the whole kind of wishing on a star thing, even at the highest level, which just blows my mind. I remember in one of your presentations, you showed a couple pictures of Phil Heath and just how he had, how your thoughts on what might have occurred and how there was a lack of predictability even there. So it's still happening at the highest level in the non-natural side of the fence, and I do think some of that comes from just not focusing on those the same details, because there's more variables to manage, and they do make a difference. It's just that they don't necessarily aren't given the same credence or importance or priority.
Yeah, and just like it was 25 years ago for everybody, it has still been dragged into that side of the sport as a philosophy of just, that's what the peaking formula is supposed to do, or whoever I'm using as a coach. They're going to give me something to do, tell me what to put in, take out, how to do it, and magic is just going to happen. I'm gonna wake up on contest day and look the best. But one of the facts that we have just torn apart here is if you are just purely throwing all of that up in the air and hoping it lands perfectly, you're always going to be disappointed that you can't control and read those variables, fine-tune your way up into the show, and then really predict exactly how you're going to look the entire day. That's the holy grail for the sport, is to really get to that point. And I think very few people even believe it's possible. They're still looking for some magic variable or formula they can manipulate, and it's just going to be this instant change and magic happens.
You're not wrong with that. I've met a surprising number of high-level competitors who still seem to be looking for the magic bullet. And they get sucked in by some of these kind of rising star and then falling guru personalities who have something to promise, or the blank diet or the blank training system, which obviously has a combination of numbers and letters. It has to, it's FST7, P90X, MI40, whatever you want to call it. You got to have some numbers and letters. It's kind of a requirement.
That's exactly what my next book was going to be.
Yeah, you're just missing the numbers. You got the letters.
That's right.
Team K40.
It's a little shorter than that, but that's exactly the direction I was going.
Nice.
Now, I would like to shift gears, put that one up there for Eric, because I know he loves upon a double entendre.
You did great.
I do want to ask you more from the business side, Dr. Joe. You're someone now who has been in business for over 25 years. You've made career changes in the sense that where you said you're focusing more on your franchises, building those, brick and mortar business. What are some of your best takeaways for aspiring coaches, trainers, practitioners that want to be in this for the long term? That, they're not the individuals that get into this for the Instagram and they're like, I'm going to build a sick following and then I'm going to take photos of myself on the beach and that's it. Like, for those that see a long-term career, you're a great person, a great example to follow. What are some of the best takeaways that you can give for those that are looking to make this a career?
Well, this is going to parallel some of the things we chatted about in terms of social media evolution and just the information age. But several years ago, I spoke at the ISSN National Conference, and Dr. Bill Campbell invited me to speak and wanted me to talk about the future of change in the coaching industry and what was happening, as far as predictors upcoming. And one of the things I found in a lot of the prognosticators who were trying to, through club industry and IDEA, look at exactly what the future of personal training and coaching was going to be, back then they were saying that the smaller, more boutique places, and I'm talking about physical facilities, are going to take over and they're going to be the force to reckon with for the next 20 years. And they looked at that as a backlash against the 120,000 square foot Lifetime Fitness chains and things like that, where you go into this almost health complex and try and get a good workout. And I think they saw that because of the social media being more of an isolating force in people's lives, that people were going to gravitate toward this place where they could just, have a one-stop shop experience. And since that time, CrossFit and all of the boot camp type facilities have turned that kind of gym into an almost $5 billion industry, and they just keep growing. I've seen places like 9 Round and Fit Body Boot Camp and Burn Boot Camp and all these places just grow to the point where if you count them along with CrossFit, you're looking at almost 20,000 facilities. And I think that speaks to one thing that's incredibly important, and I would say this is the central component of the future, is that you can no longer, because of social media, sell information. You have to sell experience. And it's a lot easier to do when you have a physical facility that somebody can see you at, where you can become part of their daily experience. There's this phenomena called the third space. We all have our work life, we have our home life, almost like Cheers, the bar where everybody knows your name, whether it's a church community or a bar community or a fitness community, we all have that third space identity. And those of us who want that to be in the fitness world, you really have to focus on the experience you can give. And if you're an online coach, I would say you're at a disadvantage to have that anchor point in your community. But I also know people are very good at creating that online community in itself. Eric mentioned, having Skype calls with clients. I know Paul Ravella says he won't even accept a client until he's had a 30-minute phone call with them. And I know how many times I've just been completely online with clients, and then all of a sudden you hear their voice on the phone for the first time, or you meet them in person, and it feels like you've known them for years, and you realize this is the first time I've actually had any kind of human contact outside of a keyboard exchange. And so whether you're exclusively online or not, you can go to events, you can go to fitness camps, you can go to bodybuilding contests, you can create some kind of persona exchange that's more than digital. But I think that's truly the future. Whoever can create the best experience, because it's not about just the right formulas, the right protocols. Even if you absolutely suck, you are the worst coach ever, if you make somebody feel great about the experience, they'll chalk it up to something else. They'll say, well, yeah, it's my body's just hard to deal with, or this or that. They'll blame themselves before they'll blame the coach, as long as they have a tremendous experience.
Yeah, just a quick aside from that, I don't want to take credit from this. I think I was reading the book Homo Deus, where they talk about experiences and how we reflect on experiences too, but how the back end, so if you look at an overall experience to start to finish, people will recall much more effectively the last portion even of that experience. So when you talk about how you structure an experience to optimize in someone's personal takeaway. And he gave the example of just childbirth, where it's an incredibly difficult. The entire process is just grueling if you look at it, but the end, at the very end, with the child being born, is such an upswing that the overall, when you ask any mother the experience, it's life changing. But a similar idea with experiences that people have on social media, what you provide to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people in the end want to feel connected and want to feel a part of something. And that's, especially in an amateur sport like bodybuilding, where you don't participate because your dad said you have to, while you're in high school, do at least one sport per semester or what have you, or something like that. You decide, I'm going to go do this thing. Oh, and by the way, it's something that requires me to be vulnerable and to suffer a fair amount and to drastically change my life. Just having a support network and having someone in your corner who gets you or connects with you, I think it has inherent value. And like Dr. Joe said, yeah, maybe they didn't do a great job with your nutrition and training. You still probably got a lot out of that, and will appreciate it. So I would agree. Yeah, one last thing that you're doing that's probably the most recent thing I've seen you talk about is you've gotten more, not that you weren't already, into the space of training trainers with your new certification. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so Corey and I were looking for a way to onboard people into our Diet Doc franchising, more of a lead nurturing way. You know, it was always just a hard yes or no. If you want to become involved, you do, and now you're in partnership with us, or you don't. And so just as, you know, things like sales funnels and lead nurturing and inbound marketing became more recognized, you know, marketing concepts, we decided we just didn't have anything like that. So maybe we should do entrepreneurial courses or weekend experiences or things like that. And about that same time, Tyler Mayer of, you know, TNT came to us. He was already a Diet Doc program owner in Phoenix. He created, you know, flexibledieting.com, that URL. You know, he said he had this idea to create a certification program, and would I be interested? And initially I almost said no, because it really mirrored exactly what we were already creating. But then I thought, you know, maybe it was a great idea to have that as a standalone company that could still filter into us. But then an interesting thing happened as Shredded by Science and Precision Nutrition, you know, got legs under their own ideas. I thought, okay, this is definitely going to be a future, because the entry barrier is much lower, and they're already providing some proof of concept. So let's go all in on that. And so we did create the National Academy of Metabolic Science. And you know, this is quite literally creating college courses almost, you know, one at a time. So it took us about 3 years to really develop everything that we wanted. And now we launched that last year. We have a certified nutrition consultant tier 1. So that's the base model where we know we're teaching people everything they need to know about physiology and nutrition and those elements to become just a good consultant. And then tier 2 was physique sport coaching. We're already planning tiers 3 and 4 to be, you know, mindset and life coaching, and then a fitness entrepreneurship level. So it's been completely a blast, because it allows us to work with a population that don't necessarily have the design yet to become an absolute business force, but they want to know this stuff. They want to at least take one step toward the nutrition coaching industry. So it's been a lot of fun. The experience, that feedback that we're getting from our graduates has been amazing. I know you have to get some of that same satisfaction, Eric, through Shredded by Science. So, you know, that's where a lot of my focus is now, because I think just naturally people who are interested in better business development will come into our Diet Doc family, but focusing my time on just making sure we have the best, you know, pedagogical system of helping people learn and become competent coaches. We've actually had a lot of students who have gone through other certification agencies for nutrition, and they said, you know, hands down, you guys have provided the absolute best, most hands-on process, so that I really feel, instead of just learning some of the science, you helped me become a real coach. And so that's where we're headed with that, and it's been a lot of fun so far.
It is a lot of fun, and I really relate to that. I have some really fond memories of me and Dr. Zerdos hanging out in Miami, recording the first Shredded by Science videos, and then redoing them in London in 2017, and now them rebranding to the Personal Trainer Collective. And there is definitely something very fulfilling about being able to pay it forward and kind of make sure the ladder is still down behind you, and like, okay, what have I learned? Because I came up in an era where I had to piece together what it is to be an online coach and an online bodybuilding coach even more so. I remember a meeting in 2009 when we just formed 3DMJ, and we were thinking about, like, what forms do we need? What should we charge? How should we advertise? What should our website look like? And there were literally two places to look, you and Lane, and that was it. And so doing our own thing and finding our own voice and leveraging our own expertise was very much finding our way through the forest. So now it's cool to be able to say, hey, this is what I learned through that experience. This is what I've also learned through my formal education. And this is what I've learned through being in the trenches as an athlete and a coach. And let me formalize that, get peer review, and then actually create a certification. And being able to pass on that knowledge, I think, is really, really important for our industry, and also something that Omar and I have talked about a number of times. The whole reason we're doing Iron Culture is, I think that as we evolve as entrepreneurs and as we evolve as, I would say, science communicators and educators, we crave complexity and finding a way to leave a meaningful legacy to where we're helping other people to come up behind us.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is perfectly said. I love that whole concept of, when we're done with our own career, what will be left. And for anybody who has any self-awareness, I think your metaphor of leaving a ladder behind is just perfect, because you're exactly right. You don't want to just have, made a pile of cash and left, or put a name on a building, but really to make sure that you've advanced a path forward for people to get to a better place. I've often said, when people ask what I do for a living, and I look at all of these things that I actually do for a living, I almost just like to say I'm an explorer. I like to be out front looking for new ways of doing things better and leaving a better path for people to follow.
Okay, Dr. Joe, so would you agree or not agree then with the statement when we talk about personal fulfillment? Would you say the sole function of any individual in a capitalist society is to maximize personal wealth? Is that a yes then, or that's a no?
That would be a very profound no.
Oh, I see. Okay, there's more to life than just making it rain dollars.
I'm very impressed that you understand and have that nomenclature perfectly between capitalism and social democracy and Marxism and all of that, because most people don't consider those things. I do believe that we function better as a culture through collective embracing of certain values. And ironically, no matter what label we put on each other, we really do have the same values. We want to live our best lives. We want to have the best place for our families and our future to share with us. But how we look at that from the outside is often with slings and arrows, and that's part of culture that I don't necessarily like. So I think you can make enough money by just being good at what you do, and there's enough room in the pie for everybody.
Love it.
Well said.
Yeah,
you heard it here. Dr. Joe strongly advocates for totalitarian controlled communist state.
Yes.
Specifically
That's what I heard from
a
that.
dictatorial, yes.
Yes.
Top down, supreme leader. Yes.
New company
Service to
coming
the
up
state.
instead of the diet
statist.
the diet dictatorship.
That's right.
Exactly.
No.
Yep.
Perfect way. We can just make this the intro.
The soundbite. Exactly.
Yep.
Gotcha journalism. That's what we do.
Dr. Joe on the best form of government for the U.S. moving forward.
Totalitarianism with Dr. Joe, yes.
Dr. Joe, let me ask you this then. Final questions. What's next for you, and then where can people find you?
Well, you can always go to thedietdoc.com. That's just an easy way to find me. But my email address is also dr.joa JOE at thedietdoc.com. What's next for me? We are, I don't know, we're always continuing to look for new things to do with the Diet Doc. We're right now flirting with the idea of creating a brick and mortar component to our licensing. Right now, we like to say that we license by creating the nutrition systems and curriculum for program owners to use any way they want. But we also, because again, I know that space is growing in the personal training, functional training, boot camp type facility. So I'm talking to a couple different companies about maybe a partnership between the Diet Doc and us. I'm also considering just doing something independently. But other than that, I'm just going to fly around the world with Eric and hang out on beaches and film videos.
Love it.
Perfect.
Beach body.
I'm so excited right now. Well, hey, Dr. Joe, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I mean it in no small part that I'm really glad that you were the kind of the progenitor of the modern online bodybuilding coach, because I think it set the stage for something a lot better than what it could have been had someone more snaky been the first on the scene. And it's been a pleasure having you and kind of learning the history and the depth to what you've done. And I think it will probably give all of us who are newer coaches on the scene an appreciation for what's all gone into where we are today.
Well, thank you very much. You guys are awesome. And I really appreciate what you've done, Eric, in pushing the industry forward into an evidence-based arena. And Omar, you as well. I mean, every single generation that comes up, it's just adding more and more layers to what we do. And I'm not somebody who wants to just sit here and be protective of information. I really view what we do as very open source, and very happy to collaborate with all kinds of phenomenal people like you guys.
And I just want to thank everyone for listening to this episode of Iron Culture Podcast, the #1 totalitarian supporting podcast on the interwebs. You can find us every Monday on iTunes, on Spotify, on the YouTubes. You can help us out. If you enjoy this episode right here, you can leave a rating and review. We're not saying a positive review, just a review, an honest, truthful one, something from the heart. Simple, clean, precise. And we'll catch everyone every single Monday with the next episode of Iron Culture.